First thing I noticed wasn't the voice, it was the clipboard. White, pristine, held like a weapon by a woman standing in the middle of my driveway, as if she owned the concrete beneath her heels. Behind her, two men in HOA vests were already moving toward my garage, snapping photos like they were documenting a crime scene. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" I called out, stepping outside, my pulse already rising. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she glanced at me with a calm, almost rehearsed expression. "James Anderson?" she asked, flipping a page on her clipboard. "That depends on who's asking." She gave a tight smile. "Melissa Grant, compliance officer for the HOA. We've issued multiple notices regarding violations on this property. Since you failed to respond, we're proceeding with formal enforcement." One of the men crouched near my truck, snapping a close-up of the tires. Another pointed toward the side of my house. "Unapproved modifications," he muttered, jotting something down. My jaw tightened. "You're trespassing." Melissa tilted her head slightly, like she'd heard that line 100 times before. "Actually, under the HOA agreement you signed when purchasing this home, we have the right to inspect and document violations. I didn't sign anything that lets you walk onto my property like this." "Oh, you did," she said smoothly. "Or at least, your paperwork says you did." That's when I noticed him, standing just across the street, watching, arms crossed, smug expression barely hidden behind a fake look of concern. My neighbor, Daniel Brooks, the man who started all of this. He gave me a small wave, not friendly, not neighborly, the kind of wave that says, "Yeah, I did this." I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "What violations are we talking about?" Melissa flipped another page. "Unauthorized vehicle modifications, exterior alterations without approval, and," she paused for effect, "failure to maintain community aesthetic standards." I almost laughed. "You've got to be kidding me." But no one laughed. The camera kept clicking, the clipboard kept moving, and Daniel kept watching. That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't a warning. This was a setup. My name is James Anderson. I'm 38 years old. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside the city. The kind of place where everything looks perfect from the outside. Clean lawns, matching mailboxes, smiling neighbors who only smile when it benefits them. I work as a compliance consultant, not the kind most people think of. I specialize in regulatory systems, contract structures, and enforcement loopholes. Basically, I deal with organizations that think they understand rules, until they don't. I'm not loud. I don't start problems, but I also don't lose them. And until a few weeks ago, I had no idea my biggest case would be happening right outside my front door. Have you ever had someone take a small issue and turn it into something way bigger than it needed to be? Something that suddenly pulls in people, rules, and pressure you didn't even know existed? If you've experienced anything like that, go ahead and share your story below. And if you want more stories like this that might actually help you handle situations like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Because what happened next, it escalated fast. It all started with a sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just a knock. I remember opening the door that morning and seeing Daniel standing there, holding a folded piece of paper like it was something official. "Morning," he said, forcing a smile. I nodded. "What's up?" He held out the paper. "Just wanted to give you a heads up, some of your recent changes might not be HOA compliant." I didn't take the paper. "What changes?" He gestured vaguely toward my driveway. "The truck, the exterior work you've been doing. It's just people are starting to notice." "People?" I asked. He hesitated. "You know how it is. The neighborhood has standards." That was the first red flag, not because of what he said, but how he said it. Like he wasn't speaking for himself. Like he was already positioning himself behind something bigger. "I've been here for 2 years, Daniel," I said calmly. "Nothing I've done violates anything." He shrugged. "Hey, I'm just trying to help you avoid a problem." That was the second red flag. People who just try to help don't show up with folded papers and vague warnings. They show up with solutions. "What is that?" I asked, nodding toward the paper. "Just a notice," he said. "Unofficial. Thought I'd save you some trouble." I finally took it. It wasn't official. No letterhead, no signatures, just a list of concerns. Truck parked visibly, garage door open too long during renovations, exterior paint variation. I looked back up at him. "You wrote this?" He smiled again. Let's just say I'm proactive. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. I appreciate the concern, I said, handing the paper back. But I'll handle my property my way. His smile faded just a little. That's your choice. Then he turned and walked away. And that should have been the end of it. But people like Daniel don't stop at warnings. They escalate. 3 days later, the first official letter arrived, stamped, signed, HOA letterhead. I remember standing in my kitchen, reading it twice, then a third time. Formal notice of violation, multiple infractions listed, deadline for compliance, possible fines, further enforcement action. It was clean, professional, and completely one-sided. No prior communication, no request for clarification, just accusation. That's when I started paying attention, not reacting, observing. Because in my line of work, the first move isn't always the most important, it's the second one. How they respond when you don't react the way they expect. I didn't call, I didn't email, I didn't comply. I waited, and right on schedule, they showed up. Which brings us back to my driveway. Melissa closed her clipboard and looked at me again. You'll receive a formal escalation notice within 48 hours. I suggest you begin corrective action immediately. Or what? I asked. One of the men stood up from my truck. Or enforcement continues. That's not an answer. Melissa stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound serious. Mr. Anderson, this doesn't have to get complicated. I met her gaze. Too late. There was a pause. Not long, but enough. Enough for her to realize something. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't apologizing. And I wasn't backing down. Behind her, Daniel shifted slightly, like he was waiting for something. Waiting for me to snap, to argue, to make a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I asked a simple question. Who filed the complaint? Melissa didn't answer right away, which told me everything. I'm not required to disclose that, she said finally. Of course not, I replied. I glanced past her, straight at Daniel. He looked away. That tiny reaction? That was confirmation. And now I knew exactly where to focus. Melissa turned to leave, signaling her team to wrap up. You'll be hearing from us soon. I'm counting on it, I said. They walked off my property like they'd already won. Like the process was already in motion. Like I was just another homeowner who didn't understand how this worked. But here's the thing they didn't know. I'd seen this before. Different setting, different rules, same structure. Someone files a complaint, and authority steps in. Pressure builds, and the target folds. That's how it's supposed to go. That's how it usually goes. But Daniel made one mistake, and the HOA made another. They assumed I didn't understand the system. They assumed I'd react emotionally instead of strategically. And most importantly, they had no idea who they were actually dealing with. I stood there for a moment after they left, the silence settling back into the neighborhood like nothing had happened. Across the street, Daniel slowly stepped back into his house, closing the door just a little too quickly. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because now it was clear. This wasn't about fixing a problem. This was about winning one. Because the next letter they sent, it wasn't a warning. It was a threat. The next letter arrived exactly when Melissa said it would. 48 hours, not early, not late, right on schedule. That alone told me something important. This wasn't random enforcement. This was procedural, structured, deliberate. I stood at my mailbox for a moment, turning the envelope over in my hands. Thicker this time. Heavier. The kind of document designed to feel official before you even open it. Across the street, Daniel's blinds shifted slightly. He was watching again. I didn't react. I just walked back inside, closed the door behind me, and set the envelope on the kitchen counter. Then I made coffee. Slowly, because timing matters. Not just what you do, but when you do it. By the time I finally opened the letter, I already knew what I was going to find. But even I had to admit, they escalated faster than I expected. Final notice of violation. Not second notice, not follow-up. Final. I let out a quiet breath, scanning the page. Daily fines listed in exact amounts. A compliance deadline that was aggressive. And then the line that mattered most. Failure to comply may result in legal action, property liens, and authorized removal or correction of non-compliant structures and items at the homeowner's expense. I read that sentence twice, then a third time. Authorized removal. That explained the cameras, the inspection. They weren't just documenting, they were preparing. Wow, I muttered under my breath. Not because I was intimidated, Because I was impressed. They skipped steps. And when an organization skips steps, it usually means one of two things. They're either incompetent, or they're confident no one will challenge them. Behind me, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Mr. Anderson? This is Melissa Grant from the HOA. I wanted to confirm you received the escalation notice. Of course she did. I did, I said calmly. A brief pause, probably expecting resistance or panic. So you understand the urgency of the situation? I understand what the letter says. That's good, she replied, her tone tightening just slightly. Then I assume you'll begin corrective action immediately. I leaned against the counter, glancing out the window. Daniel was still there, still pretending not to watch. I have a question, I said. Go ahead. Before issuing this final notice, what attempt was made to verify the validity of the complaints? Silence. But long enough. Mr. Anderson, the HOA operates based on submitted reports and observed violations. That's not what I asked. Another pause. I could almost hear her recalibrating. There were multiple observations conducted, she said more carefully. Documented by who? Our compliance team. Which includes you? Yes. On what dates? This time the silence stretched a little longer, because now we weren't talking about rules anymore. We were talking about process. Those details are included in your file, she said. Great, I replied. I'd like a copy. You can submit a formal request. I will, I cut in, today. That wasn't the answer she wanted. I could tell. Mr. Anderson, she said, her tone shifting again, softer this time, almost persuasive. It would be much easier to just resolve the violations. These processes can become complicated. There it was, not a threat, not directly, but a suggestion, a warning wrapped in politeness. I'm sure they can, I said. That's why I like to understand them. Another pause, then very well, you'll receive instructions for submitting your request. Looking forward to it. I hung up before she could say anything else, and for the first time since this started, I smiled. Because now they knew. I wasn't playing the role they expected. I wasn't the homeowner scrambling to fix things. I was asking questions, the kind that slows everything down, the kind that forces people to justify what they've already done. And organizations hate that, especially ones that rely on momentum. I finished my coffee and grabbed my laptop, setting it on the dining table. If they wanted to escalate, I'd meet them there, but on my terms. The first thing I did was pull up my purchase documents. Every agreement, every clause, every line most people skim past. HOA agreements are predictable, long, dense, designed to overwhelm. But they all have one thing in common: limits. You just have to know where to look. It didn't take long. Section 8.2, Inspection and Enforcement Authority. I read it once, then again, slower. Reasonable notice shall be provided prior to non-emergency property inspection. I nodded slightly. No notice had been given. Not before they showed up. Strike one. I kept reading. Enforcement actions must follow a progressive notice structure. I leaned back in my chair. There it was. Progressive. Not immediate escalation. Not final notice after a single letter. Strike two. And then the part that made me pause. Any corrective action involving removal of property must be preceded by homeowner hearing or written consent. I closed the document slowly. Strike three. Across the street, Daniel stepped out onto his porch, phone in hand, trying to look casual. I watched him for a moment. Then I stood up and walked outside. His head snapped up slightly when he saw me approaching. Hey, he said, forcing that same smile again. Everything okay? I stopped at the edge of my driveway. You tell me. He chuckled lightly. I'm not the one getting letters from the HOA. No, I said. You're the one sending them. His smile froze. Just for a second. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? I tilted my head slightly. Because this whole thing started right after you showed up with your little, unofficial notice. That was just neighborly advice. Was it? He shifted his weight. Look, James, the community has standards. If something's out of line, it gets reported. That's how it works. I nodded slowly. You're right. He relaxed a little at that. Big mistake. That is how it works, I continued. Someone reports something. The HOA reviews it, they verify it, then they follow proper procedure. His expression tightened again, because now he could hear it. The difference in tone. I stepped a little closer. Not aggressive, just enough. But that's not what happened here, is it? He didn't answer. Didn't need to. I could see it in his eyes. The confidence he had 2 days ago, it wasn't gone, but it wasn't as solid. "You should be careful," he said finally, his voice lower now. "Fighting the HOA doesn't usually end well." I almost laughed. "Good thing I'm not fighting the HOA, I said. He frowned. "Then what are you doing?" I held his gaze for a moment. Then I said very calmly, "I'm studying them." That landed. You could see it. The uncertainty, the shift. Because now this wasn't a complaint anymore. It was a situation. And he wasn't entirely sure he was still in control of it. I turned and walked back toward my house without another word. Behind me, I heard his door close, faster than usual. Inside, I sat back down at my laptop and started drafting my response. Not emotional, not defensive, precise. Request for documentation. Request for inspection logs, request for complaint records, request for compliance procedures. Every question designed to do one thing: slow them down. Because the faster an organization moves without oversight, the more mistakes it makes, and I had already found 3. But something told me there were more. Later that evening, just as the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered on, a car pulled up in front of my house. Not HOA, different. Black sedan, clean, tinted windows. I watched from inside as the driver stepped out. A woman. Mid-40s, confident posture, no clipboard this time. She walked up to my door and knocked once. Firm, controlled. I opened it. "Yes?" She looked at me for a moment, studying. Then she said, "James Anderson?" "That depends." A faint smile crossed her face. "I think you know who I am." I didn't respond. Didn't need to. "I'm Rachel Turner," she continued. "Board representative." That was new. Melissa was compliance. Rachel? That meant oversight, higher level. Interesting. "To what do I owe the visit?" I asked. She glanced briefly toward the street, toward Daniel's house, then back at me. "Let's just say," she said quietly, "things have gotten a little more complicated than they were supposed to." Now I smiled. Just slightly. "Yeah," I said. "I noticed." She held my gaze for a second longer, then asked, "Do you mind if we talk?" And just like that, the situation shifted. Because when the board shows up personally, it means one thing: something's gone off script. And whatever it is, it's big enough that they don't want it handled on paper anymore. I stepped aside just enough to let her in. Rachel didn't hesitate. She walked past me with the kind of quiet confidence you only see in people who are used to being listened to. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain. I closed the door behind her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She took a slow look around the room. Not in a judgmental way like Melissa's team had done, but observant, calculated, like she was piecing something together. "Nice place," she said finally. "Thank you." Another brief silence. Then she turned to face me fully. "You've been busy." I leaned against the counter, arms relaxed. "Depends on your definition." Her lips curved slightly. "Most homeowners don't respond to a final notice by requesting full procedural documentation within 2 hours. So you got my request." "Oh, we got it," she said. "And that's actually why I'm here." I nodded slowly. I figured. She studied me for a second longer, then walked toward the dining table where my laptop was still open. The HOA agreement sat on the screen. Her eyes flicked over it. Section 8.2. She noticed. Of course, she did. "You went straight to enforcement authority," she said. Seemed relevant. "It is." An answer was simple. Too simple. Which meant she wasn't here to argue. She pulled out a chair, but didn't sit. Instead, she rested her hands lightly on the back of it. "Let me ask you something, James," she said. "What exactly do you think is happening here?" I didn't answer immediately. Because the question wasn't casual. It was strategic. She wanted to know how much I knew. So I gave her just enough. "I think a complaint was filed," I said. "I think your compliance officer acted on it without fully verifying it. I think procedures were skipped. And I think the situation escalated faster than it should have." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes did. Just slightly. "And the neighbor?" she asked. I glanced toward the window. Daniel's house was dark now, but I knew he was there, watching. "Overconfident," I said, "but not the main problem." Rachel nodded once slowly. "Fair assessment." That told me something. She wasn't defending him, which meant he wasn't protected. Interesting. "And you?" she asked. "What about me? What role do you think you're playing in all of this?" I almost smiled because that question, that was the real one. "I'm the one you escalated against," I said simply. She held my gaze. Then, for the first time since she walked in, she sat down. Not as an authority, as someone preparing for a conversation. That's where you're wrong, she said. I didn't interrupt. You weren't escalated against, she continued. You were fast-tracked. I raised an eyebrow slightly. That's a new term. It's an accurate one. How so? She leaned back slightly, folding her hands. The complaint that came in wasn't treated like a normal complaint. Why not? Another pause. Measured, careful. Because of how it was presented. That was vague. Deliberately. Try again, I said. A small smile touched her lips. You don't like incomplete answers. No, I don't like unclear processes. She nodded once like she respected that. Then she said it. The complaint was supported. By who? She didn't answer immediately. But this time, the silence felt different. Heavier. Multiple entries, she said finally. Similar concerns. Submitted within a short time frame. I straightened slightly. That's not normal, I said. No, she agreed. It's not. And no one thought to question that? Oh, they did, she said. But by then, it had already reached Melissa. I let out a quiet breath. There it was. Momentum. Exactly what I expected. And Melissa? I asked. Rachel's expression shifted just a little. She's efficient, she said. But sometimes, efficiency comes at the cost of caution. That was the most diplomatic way I'd ever heard someone say someone else messed up. So she skipped steps, I said. Rachel didn't deny it. She followed what she believed was sufficient evidence. That's not the same thing. No, Rachel said. It's not. For a moment, the room was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't tense. It was aligned. Not agreement, but understanding. Then Rachel leaned forward slightly. Here's where things get complicated, she said. I'm listening. Your response triggered a review. Of course it did. And that review uncovered inconsistencies. I nodded slowly. Let me guess. Missing notices, incomplete documentation, no proper inspection logs. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. You've done this before. Once or twice. She studied me again. Longer this time, like she was reassessing everything she thought she knew about this situation. James, she said carefully, what exactly do you do? There it was, the question. Not about the HOA, not about the complaint, about me. I didn't answer right away, because timing matters. And this was one of those moments. You first? I said, why come here in person? She held my gaze, then exhaled slowly, because if this continues the way it's going, it doesn't stay internal. And that's a problem? For everyone involved, she said, including you. I considered that for a second. Then I nodded. Fair answer. My turn, I said. She waited. I told you earlier, I continued. I'm a compliance consultant. That's broad. It's supposed to be. She didn't smile this time. What kind of compliance? She asked. I stepped away from the counter and walked over to the table, closing the laptop halfway. Organizations, I said. Structures. Enforcement systems. Her eyes didn't leave mine. And what do you do with them? She asked. I paused. Just long enough. Then I said, I find out where they break. Silence. Not the brief kind. The kind that settles. Because now she understood. Not everything, but enough. You're not just reviewing this, she said quietly. No. You're testing it. I didn't confirm it. Didn't need to. She leaned back in her chair again, processing. Across the street, a light flicked on in Daniel's house. Right on time. Watching again. Always watching. Rachel followed my glance toward the window. Is he the one who started it? She asked. Yes. And he has no idea. She didn't finish the sentence. But she didn't need to. I shook my head slightly. No, I said, he doesn't. Another silence. Then Rachel stood up, slowly, like she'd reached a decision. All right, she said. Let's be clear about where we are. I crossed my arms loosely. Go ahead. You've identified procedural failures. Yes. You've formally requested documentation. Yes. And if those requests aren't handled correctly, they won't be, I said calmly. Her eyes sharpened slightly. You're confident? I'm observant. She nodded once, then took a step closer, not confrontational, focused. Then let me give you something in return, she said. I didn't speak. Melissa doesn't know I'm here. That was interesting. The board is divided on this situation. Even more interesting. And Daniel? I asked. Her expression shifted just slightly. He's already made additional complaints. Of course he has. Different angles this time, she added. Noise, property use, even safety concerns. I let out a quiet breath. Escalation through volume. Predictable. Stacking pressure, I said. Yes. And you let it through? For now, she said. Because stopping it too early raises questions. I nodded slowly. Smart, but risky. Then she looked at me, directly. So here's the question, James. I waited. How far are you planning to take this? That question hung in the air. Not casual, not theoretical, real. I thought about it for a moment. Then I gave her the only honest answer. That depends, I said. On what? I glanced once more toward the window, toward Daniel's house, then back at her. On how far they push. Rachel held my gaze. Then slowly, she nodded. Then you should know something, she said. What's that? She stepped toward the door, her voice quieter now. Melissa's preparing enforcement action. I didn't react, but inside, that clicked. What kind? I asked. She opened the door halfway, then paused. Physical. And just like that, the situation shifted again. Because paperwork is one thing, letters are one thing, but physical enforcement? That's where mistakes stop being small and start becoming expensive. Rachel looked back at me one last time. If I were you, she said, I'd be ready. Then she walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Until I heard it. A faint metallic sound, outside, from the direction of my driveway. I moved to the window, and what I saw confirmed everything. Because this time, they didn't come with clipboards. They came with equipment. I didn't rush to the door. That's the part most people get wrong. They hear something, they react immediately, emotions first, thinking later. But by the time I reached the window and saw what was happening in my driveway, I already knew. Speed wasn't the advantage here. Control was. 2 trucks. Not standard HOA vehicles. Contractors. 1 flatbed, 1 utility truck with mounted equipment. The kind used for removals, not inspections. A 3rd vehicle idled behind them, Melissa's. And standing beside it, Melissa Grant herself. Clipboard gone, tablet in hand this time. More efficient, more decisive, more dangerous. One of the contractors was already unrolling a strap near my truck. Another was inspecting the side of my house, pointing at the section they had previously labeled as non-compliant. They weren't here to document. They were here to act. I stepped outside. Slow. Measured. Every movement intentional. Don't, I said, my voice cutting clean through the air. It wasn't loud, but it carried. The contractor paused mid-motion, glancing over at Melissa. She turned toward me, completely composed. Mr. Anderson, she said, as if this were a routine follow-up, you failed to meet the compliance deadline outlined in your final notice. We're proceeding with corrective enforcement. You skipped the hearing, I replied. Her expression didn't change. You were given notice. That's not the same thing. She took a step closer, tablet still in hand. At this stage, enforcement authority allows. No, I cut in, just slightly firmer this time. At this stage, enforcement authority requires documented progression, verified inspection logs, and a formal hearing before any physical action. One of the contractors shifted uncomfortably. They didn't like this. People doing their job rarely do when the job suddenly becomes uncertain. Melissa, however, held her ground. Those requirements have been satisfied internally, she said. Then show them. A beat. Short. Sharp. I'm not obligated to present internal documentation on site, she replied. Then you're not authorized to proceed on site. That landed. Not loudly, but precisely. Behind her, the second contractor lowered his tools slightly, glancing between us. Because now it wasn't just a job anymore. It was a question. Melissa's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Mr. Anderson, refusing enforcement will only escalate this further. I nodded once. Good. That caught her off guard. Not dramatically, but enough. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be? She said. No, I replied calmly. You already did that. For a moment, neither of us moved. The tension wasn't explosive. It was controlled, like a pressure system building quietly before it decides what it wants to become. Then I did something she didn't expect. I stepped past her, not aggressively, not confrontationally, just enough to position myself between the contractors and my property. And then I addressed them directly. Before you touch anything, I said, you should know this action is currently being conducted without verified procedural compliance, without a recorded hearing, and without documented authorization presented to the property owner. They froze. Not because of me. Because of what that meant for them. Liability. Melissa turned sharply. You don't need to listen to that. You're operating under HOA authorization. I glanced back at her. Then show it. Silence. Again, but this time it spread. The kind of silence that moves outward. From one person to the next. And then across the street, where Daniel had stepped outside again. watching, waiting. Except this time, he wasn't smiling. Melissa took a breath, then tapped something on her tablet, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "You're interfering with an authorized action," she said, her tone tightening, "and you're initiating one without meeting your own requirements," I replied. "That's not interference, that's exposure." Another pause, longer now, because the situation had shifted. Completely. This wasn't enforcement anymore. It was risk. And risk is where people start to hesitate. Right on cue, Rachel's car pulled up. Fast. Not reckless, but urgent. She stepped out immediately, walking straight toward us. "Stop," she said. Not loudly, but with authority that didn't need volume. Everyone turned, even Melissa. "Rachel," she said, clearly not expecting this. "We're in the middle of—" I said stop. That was different, not a suggestion, an instruction. The contractors stepped back instantly, tools lowered, movement halted. Because now the chain of command had changed. Melissa's jaw tightened slightly. "This action is within compliance authority." "No," Rachel said, stepping forward. "It's not." Silence dropped again, heavier this time, because this wasn't a homeowner pushing back. This was internal, visible, real. "You bypassed procedural sequencing," Rachel continued. "There's no recorded hearing, no verified inspection log attached to this enforcement order, and no signed authorization cleared at board level." Melissa didn't respond immediately, which in itself was an answer. Rachel turned slightly toward the contractors. "You're done here." They didn't hesitate. Tools packed, equipment retracted. Because no contractor wants to be caught in the middle of something that just turned from routine into questionable. Within minutes, the tension that had built up so carefully started to collapse. The flatbed remained idle, the straps untouched. And just like that, the enforcement was over. Melissa looked at me then, not with confidence, not with control, but with something else. Realization. "You knew this would happen," she said quietly. I met her gaze. I knew it could. That was enough. Rachel stepped closer to her, lowering her voice, but not enough that I couldn't hear. "We'll handle this internally," she said. Melissa nodded once, tight, controlled, but different. Because now she understood what she had stepped into, and more importantly, who she had stepped into it with. Across the street, Daniel slowly backed toward his door. No wave this time, no smug expression, just uncertainty. The kind that creeps in when a situation you thought you controlled slips out of your hands. I watched him for a second, then I said just loud enough for him to hear, "This isn't over." He froze for half a second, then went inside, door closing a little faster than usual. Silence settled back into the neighborhood again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had weight. After a moment, Rachel turned to me. "You made your point," she said. I shook my head slightly. "Not yet." She studied me, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Melissa said nothing. She simply turned, got into her car, and drove off without another word. The contractors followed, one by one, until the driveway was empty again. Just like that, Rachel lingered for a moment longer. "This will be reviewed," she said. "I expect it will." "And the complaints?" I glanced toward Daniel's house. "They'll stop," I said. She didn't argue, because now she understood, not just the situation, but the outcome. "Good night, James," she said. "Good night, Rachel." She left, and for the first time since this started, there was no one watching, no clipboard, no camera, no neighbor pretending to mind his business. Just quiet. I stood there for a while, letting it settle, not celebrating, not overthinking, just observing. Because situations like this, they're never really about the truck, or the paint, or the so-called violations. They're about process, control, and what happens when someone decides to push without understanding what they're pushing against. I didn't reveal everything. I didn't need to. Sometimes, the strongest move isn't showing who you are. It's letting people realize it on their own. And when they do, everything changes. So let me ask you something. What would you do if this happened to you? If someone tried to use rules, pressure, and authority to corner you without following their own process, would you push back? Would you comply? Or would you do what I did and make them prove every single step? Share your thoughts and your experiences below. I'd really like to hear how you'd handle something like this. And if you want more real stories like this, stories that don't just entertain but actually show you how to navigate situations like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the rules only matter when you know how to use them.